for African Americans, the United States has always been a proving ground. And I think the military, particularly African Americans who made contributions in the military, have played a significant role in proving that we are first-class citizens and deserve to be respected as human beings. Most importantly, participation of soldiers in the Civil War really helped end slavery, really break the chains of slavery.
As early as 1861, free blacks between the ages of 15 and 50 were allowed to join militias in some southern states. On June 21, 1861, Tennessee was the first state of the Confederacy to pass a law authorizing this.
About late 62, 63, they started to bring African Americans into the ranks of the as Union Civil War soldiers. And the 42nd and the 44th were organized out of those former slaves and contraband. The 42nd basically did the work as far as building bridges and roads, and they built a national cemetery. They did a lot of blacksmith work. They were pretty much devoted to skilled labor and build fortifications and those type of things. The 44th saw a little combat activity in and around Chattanooga, but they are mostly noted from help leading the charge at the Battle of Nashville, which was one of the most serious defeats of the Confederacy.
Despite the success of black Union soldiers, many regiments were still not paid as much as their white counterparts. This paled in comparison, however, to the horrors that took place at Fort Pillow, Tennessee on April 12, 1864. Obviously, that was one of the tragic moments in military history, particularly for African Americans. We know that there was a large unit of African American soldiers that were stationed at Fort Pillow, and along with their white counterparts. Nathan Bedford Forrest, he had made the statement earlier that if he, because the African Americans were allowed to serve as Union, part of the Union Army, that if he caught any, that they would kill them. Fort Pillow marked the most violent racially motivated act upon African American soldiers in military history. Out of the 292 black Union soldiers that were attacked, only 62 survived. From that point on, African American soldiers were often heard shouting the battle cry, "Remember Fort Pillow," in memory of their fallen brothers. The Civil War was a true proving ground under which black soldiers could be measured for their military aptitude, physical prowess, and sheer determination in overcoming the heavily stacked odds against them. On July 17, 1863, the 1st Kansas Colored Troops under General James Blunt battled Confederate troops for over 2 hours at Honey Springs Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, until the Confederates retreated. General Blunt responded to his victory, quote, "I never saw such fighting as was done by the Negro Regiment. The question that Negroes will fight is settled. Besides, they make better soldiers in every respect than any troops I have ever had under my command," unquote. On July 18, 1863, the 54th Massachusetts volunteered to lead the assault on Fort Wagner, South Carolina, in which the African American regiment scaled the fort's barrier and fought in bloody hand-to-hand combat. The 54th eventually retreated, but only after losing 116 men, including its white commanding officer, Robert Gould Shaw. Another 156 of the troop's soldiers were wounded or captured. The 54th Massachusetts became highly regarded for its incredible bravery during battle and helped encourage the continued recruitment of black troops, a point President Abraham Lincoln noted that helped secure the final victory. On September 29, 1864, at the Battle of New Market Heights, Virginia, Confederate fire pinned down the African American Division of the 18th Corps. After 30 minutes of attack, the cornered band of black soldiers charged the Confederates atop the slopes of New Market. In the hour-long skirmish, they suffered insurmountable casualties. 14 of the 16 Black Medal of Honor recipients of the Civil War received their medals for this historic battle. In 1866, Congress authorized the enlistment of African American soldiers in the regular army for the first time. In 1869, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments were sent to fight the frontier wars in the West. There, with inadequate supplies and rations, as well as injured horses, these black soldiers displayed remarkable fighting skills, so much so that the Native Americans they were sent to battle dubbed them Buffalo Soldiers because of their fierce fighting ability. The Buffalo Soldiers have achieved an almost mythic reputation throughout the nation's military as revered, honorable, and immensely skilled fighters. The Civil War was an important factor in black military history. At its close, over 300,000 African Americans had served in the war. By World War I, many technological innovations in the military were made, including chemical warfare, machine guns, and warplanes. Despite these advancements, American thinking, when it came to equal rights, took a step backwards. Once again, African Americans were restricted from the United States Armed Forces. Not until the draft was invoked on May 18, 1917, were African Americans allowed to enter the military. Once in, most were not allowed weaponry and were forced to work in supply and support positions.
Some Southerners are very reluctant, from Tennessee and other states, to have African Americans become subject to the draft. There's a fear of arming African Americans, that if you arm African Americans, they could revolt and overturn the white Southern way of life. There's also a fear that if they're conscripted, it could undermine Southern agriculture. Particularly, say, the plantations out in western Tennessee. Where would planters get their labor? And there's also fear that if African Americans saw other parts of the country and world, they would not be satisfied with, say, sharecropping and plantation labor. And in World War I, despite the sort of heroism of African Americans, their record of accomplishment, say in the American Revolution, Civil War, Spanish-American War, this is largely forgotten by a lot of the leadership. Even someone like General Pershing, who had actually at one point in his career had been serving with a black regiment. And there's a notion held by many military officials, many politicians, that African Americans don't make effective soldiers. And most African Americans who are drafted and serve in World War I do not serve in combat ranks. They serve in support functions.
There were, however, a few African American units in World War I that did see combat. The 369th Infantry Regiment, better known as the Harlem Hellfighters, fought on the front lines for 6 months, longer than any other American unit in the war. The French Legion of Merit was awarded to 171 members of this distinguished regiment.